It was a chilly evening when Alex arrived at the auction house, the lights dim and the air heavy with tension. He had been to many auctions in his life, some for business, others just to watch. He never expected anything unusual tonight. He was a man who believed in logic and order, in making decisions with his head rather than his heart, and so far that philosophy had served him well. But something about this night felt different. The room was filled with the whispers of the wealthy and powerful, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Men in suits and women in elegant gowns stood near the auction block, eagerly waiting for the next lot. Alex's eyes scanned the room. His expression was cool and indifferent. He had no intention of getting involved in any of this. He was here for one reason, to make a quick deal and leave. But as the auctioneer stepped up to the platform and the crowd fell silent, everything changed. The first lot had been sold, and the auctioneer announced the arrival of the next item. Alex didn't pay much attention at first. He glanced at the stage as the curtains were pulled back, and then his heart skipped a beat. There she stood, a woman young but with an aura of pain surrounding her. She was small, fragile-looking, yet there was something about her that caught Alex's attention. She was shackled, her wrists bound together with rough chains, and her clothes were worn and torn, barely hanging onto her thin frame. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow from what Alex assumed had been months or even years of suffering. The auctioneer spoke quickly, listing her as available for purchase. There was no mention of her past, no details about who she was. She was just a number, just another lot to be sold to the highest bidder. But Alex couldn't stop looking at her. Her eyes so full of despair, yet there was a flicker of something deeper there, something that pulled at his insides. It was as though in that single moment their eyes had locked and a silent connection had formed. She didn't plead, didn't beg, but there was a quiet desperation in her gaze that spoke volumes. It was as if she was saying without words, "I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to live like this." The auctioneer continued with his rapid speech, but Alex's attention was no longer on the crowd or the bidding process. He found himself fixated on her. He watched the way she stood, head bowed, shoulders hunched, barely able to make eye contact with anyone in the room. The other bidders seemed uninterested, almost indifferent. For them, she was just another object. But Alex couldn't see her that way. She was not just a product. She was a person, a human being who had somehow been reduced to this. The bids began. One man raised his paddle and then another, and the price slowly climbed higher. Alex was barely aware of what was happening. He wasn't planning to buy anyone tonight. He was only here for a business deal, something unrelated to this bizarre and uncomfortable scene. But the bidding became louder, more heated. He felt his pulse quicken. For some strange reason, he wanted to buy her, to take her away from this place. He couldn't explain why. It was almost like an instinct, a pull he couldn't ignore. His mind tried to fight the thought. He was a man who valued control, who believed in making rational decisions. This was not rational. He didn't need a slave, and he certainly didn't need someone who had been through so much pain. Yet, as the price increased, something inside him broke. Without even thinking, Alex raised his paddle. The room fell quiet as all eyes turned toward him. His voice was steady when he placed his bid, but his hands trembled slightly. He couldn't believe he had just done that. What was happening to him? The auctioneer's voice rang out, announcing that Alex was the highest bidder. The woman was now his, and the realization hit him like a cold wave. He had bought her. He had actually purchased a human being. But the strange thing was, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt uncomfortable. There was no excitement, no sense of winning. All he could think about was the look in her eyes, the emptiness, the sadness. The crowd began to disperse, some people murmuring about the high price they had just witnessed. Alex walked to the front of the room, his steps heavy. He had just committed to something he couldn't fully comprehend. As he stood near her, the chains clinking softly, the woman didn't look up at him. She didn't acknowledge his presence at all. She seemed completely unaware of the world around her, lost in her own thoughts. Without a word, two attendants led her to him. They handed over the cold metal chains that had bound her to the auction block, and she was now in his possession. The attendants didn't seem concerned by her condition. They were just doing their job. Alex, however, felt a strange mix of guilt and responsibility. He wasn't sure what to do with her. The situation was awkward. He didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her life. He turned to one of the attendants, his voice quieter now. "What happens now?" The attendant shrugged, looking at him with disinterest. She's yours now. Do with her as you wish." Alex stared at the woman, still not meeting his eyes. The word property echoed in his mind. Was that really what she was? A possession to be controlled? He had spent so much of his life working for power and control, but now that he had it, he felt uncertain. He had bought a person, not a thing. There was a difference, wasn't there? Without another word, Alex motioned for the woman to follow him. She obeyed without hesitation, as though she had long since stopped questioning orders. They walked together through the silent hallways, the sound of her footsteps barely audible beside his. When they reached his car, Alex opened the door for her. She slid into the back seat without a word, her eyes staring out of the window. She seemed lost in thought, but Alex couldn't help but notice the faint tremor in her hands. It was as if she was still afraid of what might happen next, afraid of the unknown. But there was something else too. Beneath her broken exterior, Alex could sense a quiet strength, a defiance that hadn't been crushed by the years of suffering she must have endured. As the car started to move, Alex could only think about one thing. What was he going to do now? He had bought her, yes, but he didn't know what that meant. He didn't know what he was supposed to do with her, and for the first time in a long while, Alex didn't have an answer. The drive from the auction house to Alex's mansion was long, quiet, and tense. The woman sat in the back of the car, her head slightly bowed, staring out the window as the city passed by in a blur. The streetlights flickered against the glass, casting shadows over her face, but she didn't seem to notice. Alex, on the other hand, was unable to stop watching her. He found himself glancing at her in the rearview mirror every few seconds, trying to make sense of what he had just done. He had always been a man of control. Every decision he made was calculated, precise. Yet buying her had been different. It was impulsive. The bid, the decision to buy her had all happened so quickly. And now, as they drove in silence, the weight of what he had done seemed to grow heavier by the minute. He didn't know why he had done it. His mind raced through every possible reason, but none of them made sense. She was just a woman, a stranger to him. He had seen many people in his life, and he had never felt this way before. Why had her quiet desperation affected him so much? The mansion was a large, imposing structure, its tall windows reflecting the night sky. As they arrived, Alex parked the car and got out, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. He opened the back door for her, offering his hand. She didn't look at him but stood up and followed him silently. Her steps were slow, almost hesitant, as though she didn't quite know where she was going or what was going to happen next. Inside the mansion, everything was pristine, cold marble floors, polished wood furniture, and towering ceilings. It was beautiful but devoid of warmth. Alex had always preferred it that way. He was a man who didn't believe in unnecessary comforts. But now, in the quiet of his home, with this woman walking behind him, it all felt different. The emptiness of the house seemed to echo through the halls. He led her to a small room off the main hallway, a simple bedroom with a bed, a dresser, and a few shelves. It wasn't luxurious, but it was private. As she stepped into the room, she seemed to hesitate for a moment, her eyes scanning the space. She didn't speak, but Alex could see the wariness in her posture. "Stay here for now," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "I'll have food brought to you." She nodded without looking at him, her shoulders slumping slightly as though the weight of her own thoughts was too much to bear. Alex left the room, closing the door behind him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for him. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the woman in the room. What was her story? What kind of life had she led before all of this? He found himself thinking about her in a way he hadn't expected. The thought of her being locked away, sold like an object, made him feel a strange anger. But at the same time, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than just the broken shell he had seen at the auction. As the night wore on, he couldn't shake the image of her sitting silently in that room. Something about her, her silence, made him want to understand her, to know what had brought her here. He had the means to give her a better life, but could he really do that? Could he help her? Or was it already too late for her? The next morning, Alex decided to check on her. He had already arranged for breakfast to be sent to her room, but he couldn't help feeling uneasy about leaving her alone for too long. He knocked gently on the door, waiting for a response. When there was no answer, he opened it slowly. She was sitting on the bed, staring at the floor, her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't look up when he entered, as though she hadn't even noticed him. He cleared his throat to announce his presence, but she didn't react. He took a step closer, unsure of what to say. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She looked up at him for the first time since he had brought her here. Her eyes were dark, filled with emotions he couldn't quite read. There was pain, yes, but also a hint of something else, something stronger. Something that didn't belong in a person who had been so broken. She didn't answer him right away, and for a moment the silence between them was deafening. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I don't need anything," Alex frowned. He could tell she was lying. She was still too afraid to show any real emotion, but there was something in her eyes that made him want to help her. He wanted to tell her that she didn't have to be afraid anymore, but he knew that it wasn't that simple. Trust wasn't something that could be earned in a single day. "Food's on the table," he said gently. "You should eat." She nodded but didn't move. Alex hesitated for a moment before turning to leave. He wasn't sure what he had expected. He had thought that by bringing her here, he would somehow be able to fix things, give her a new life, a better life. But it wasn't that simple. She wasn't some broken object that could be fixed with a few kind gestures. As he closed the door behind him, Alex couldn't help but wonder, what kind of life had she led before all this? What had happened to her to make her so wary, so closed off? And most of all, why had he been the one to buy her? What was he supposed to do now? Over the next few days, Alex kept his distance. He didn't know how to interact with her, and every time he tried, it felt like he was stepping on fragile ground. He ordered her meals, made sure she had everything she needed, but he didn't push her. She was quiet, always polite but distant, and he respected that. She had been through enough. But as the days passed, he noticed small things. She didn't flinch when he spoke to her anymore, and sometimes when he caught her gaze, there was a brief moment of recognition, as though she was beginning to see him as more than just the man who bought her. Alex's thoughts began to change. He couldn't just leave her like this. She wasn't a piece of property. She was a person with her own past, her own emotions. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. And more than that, he wanted her to see him differently. The quiet moments they shared, the glances, the small exchanges, they all seemed to build something unspoken between them. Alex found himself questioning his own motives. He had bought her, yes, but what did that really mean? What kind of relationship could they have now? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. And something inside him told him that he had just started to uncover the layers of the woman he had brought into his life. She wasn't just a broken person. She was more than that, and if he was patient, maybe he could help her find her way back. Days turned into weeks, and still, an uneasy silence hung between Alex and the woman he had bought. He had tried to understand her, but it wasn't easy. She remained distant, careful not to show too much of herself, yet every time Alex thought he understood her, something new emerged. Her eyes, dark and mysterious, seemed to hide a world of pain, but every so often they would flash with a quiet strength that caught him off guard. He wasn't sure how to help her. He had tried to be kind, offering her privacy and time to adjust to her new life, but she remained closed off. He respected her space, not wanting to push her further, yet he couldn't ignore the fact that her presence in his life was starting to affect him in ways he hadn't anticipated. One evening, Alex sat at his desk in his study going over some paperwork. The mansion was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. But as he glanced up, he saw her standing in the doorway. She didn't step inside, but she was there, her figure framed by the door. For the first time, Alex noticed something different in her. There was a kind of quiet resolve in her expression. She wasn't just standing there as she usually did, waiting to be told what to do. She was choosing to be present. "Is something wrong?" he asked, breaking the silence. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on him, almost searching. Alex put down the papers in front of him, suddenly aware of how tense the atmosphere had become. He had seen her before, watched her in the distance, trying to understand her. But tonight there was something in her that made him stop. She looked fragile, but there was an unmistakable strength in the way she held herself. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the stillness of the room. "I need to talk to you." Alex's eyebrows furrowed. He hadn't expected this. He had spent so many days wondering if she would ever open up, if she would ever share even a part of herself with him, and now it seemed like she had made the decision to do so. Slowly, he gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. "Please, sit down," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She hesitated, but then stepped inside the room. She took a seat in the chair, folding her hands tightly in her lap. She looked down at the floor, her eyes avoiding his. Alex could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her body seemed to curl in on itself as though she was bracing for something. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Alex didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask her about her past, about the life she had led before she came into his world, but he didn't want to push her too far too soon. Instead, he simply waited, hoping that she would find the courage to speak. "I don't belong here," she said finally, her voice breaking the silence. Her words were simple, but they struck Alex hard. He sat up straighter in his chair. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze for the first time in what felt like forever. There was a flicker of something, regret, sadness, maybe even anger in her eyes. But she didn't look away. She looked at him as though she was seeing him for the first time too, as though she was trying to understand who he really was. "I don't belong here," she repeated, more firmly this time. "I don't belong in this place, in this life. I don't know how I got here, but I can't just pretend everything is fine. I can't forget what happened." Alex's heart twisted in his chest. She was opening up, letting him into her world, and it was more than he had ever hoped for. But her words also stung. She didn't feel like she belonged here. And who could blame her? Her life had been turned upside down in ways Alex couldn't even imagine. He wanted to help her, wanted to make her feel safe, but he knew that it wouldn't be easy. "I didn't ask for this," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't ask to be bought. I didn't ask to be part of this world. But now I am, and I don't know what to do with it." Alex leaned forward, his tone soft but serious. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You're free here. No one is forcing you to stay. You don't have to pretend you're happy if you're not." Her eyes flashed with something unreadable, a mix of confusion and something else. She didn't seem to believe him. He could see it in the way her body tensed, as though she was waiting for the catch, for the moment when he would remind her of her place in his world. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "How can I be free? How can I ever be free again?" Alex didn't have an immediate answer. He had never been in her shoes, never known what it felt like to be trapped, to feel like you had no control over your own life. But he did know one thing. He didn't want her to feel like she was still trapped. Not here, not in his house. "I don't have all the answers," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But what I can tell you is this. You are not a prisoner here. You don't owe me anything. I bought you, but I didn't buy your soul. I didn't buy your freedom. You have the right to live your life the way you choose." She stared at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth or just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. For a moment, Alex felt the weight of his words. Could he really offer her freedom? Could he truly give her a chance to heal? "I don't know if I can ever be free," she whispered, her voice small now, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "I don't know how to live without the chains. I don't know what to do with myself." Alex's heart ached for her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the self-doubt that had been instilled in her over the years. But he also saw something else, a spark of hope, however faint it may be. And that, he realized, was something he could help nurture. It was something worth fighting for. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," he said softly. "It takes time, but you don't have to do it alone." She looked up at him, her gaze softer now. It was the first time he had seen any real vulnerability in her eyes. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crack just a little. "I don't know what this is between us," she said quietly, "but I want to try. I want to see if I can trust you." Alex nodded, his chest tightening with a mixture of relief and fear. She was starting to trust him. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. And for the first time, Alex felt like maybe, just maybe, he could help her find the freedom she so desperately needed. But it wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take time, and it would require patience, trust, and understanding, things neither of them had in abundance. Weeks passed, and the tension between Alex and the woman began to shift. It wasn't immediate, but over time there was a subtle change. Her once quiet, guarded demeanor had started to soften. She still held herself at a distance, but her eyes no longer seemed as distant, her voice less hesitant. It was as though she was learning to trust him, and in return Alex found himself trusting her more than he had expected. At first, the small improvements went unnoticed. She started sitting at the table when meals were served, engaging in casual conversations, though her responses were always short and measured. But gradually, her presence began to feel less like a reminder of what had happened and more like a genuine connection. She would ask questions, small things about the house, about his life. She never asked for much, just simple things, like what he enjoyed doing in his spare time or what his day-to-day routine looked like. Alex, in turn, shared bits of himself, though he was careful not to overwhelm her with too much. He didn't want to push her into opening up before she was ready. He didn't expect her to suddenly forget everything that had happened to her, but he did hope that with time, she might begin to feel comfortable enough to truly live again, rather than just survive. One evening after dinner, Alex found himself walking the halls of the mansion. It was a quiet night, the kind where everything felt still and calm. He wasn't sure why he was walking aimlessly, but his thoughts were restless.
He found himself in front of the room where she had been staying for the past several weeks.
The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap he could see her sitting on the bed, her head bent as she read a book. It was such a simple sight, but it struck Alex in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time, she didn't look like someone who had been broken. She looked normal content even. She was just reading, lost in her own thoughts. Alex paused for a moment, watching her. There was a sense of peace in the room, a feeling that perhaps they were both starting to find their own space in this new life. He knocked softly on the doorframe, causing her to look up. She didn't seem startled, just quietly acknowledged him with a small nod. He stepped inside, his eyes briefly scanning the room before landing on her. "Is everything okay?" Alex asked gently. His voice was calm, but he couldn't hide the curiosity that had crept into his tone. She had been so quiet for so long, so withdrawn. He couldn't help but wonder what had changed. She set the book down on the bed beside her, her fingers lingering on the cover for a moment. "Yes, everything's fine," she said, though her voice was softer than usual. I wanted to be alone for a while." Alex nodded, understanding. He had learned to respect her need for space, just as she had learned to accept his presence. It was a silent agreement between them, no pressure, just the slow building of trust. He didn't mind the quiet moments they shared. In fact, he found them comforting. It was a sign that things were slowly changing, that perhaps they were both beginning to heal in their own way. "I understand," he replied, his voice steady. "I just wanted to check in." She met his gaze then, her eyes steady and calm. "You don't have to keep checking on me," she said, a small hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not a child." Alex chuckled, the sound light and unexpected. "I know," he said, the warmth in his voice surprising even him. I don't want you to feel like you're alone." For a brief moment, her expression softened. She didn't answer, but her gaze held something deeper. Appreciation, perhaps, or understanding. Alex wasn't sure, but it was the first time he felt like they had crossed a line, however small, into something more than just an agreement of silence and coexistence. "I'm not alone," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. I don't know how to move forward from everything that's happened." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment Alex wasn't sure how to respond. He had known from the beginning that helping her wasn't going to be easy. There would be no instant fixes, no simple answers to the deep, painful scars she carried. It was going to take time, patience, and understanding. But the more time they spent together, the more he realized how much he wanted to be part of her journey, not just as someone who had bought her, but as someone who could help her rebuild her life. "You don't have to have all the answers," Alex said, his voice softer now. "No one does. But you're not alone in this. I'll be here for as long as you need me." She didn't respond at first, but the quiet look she gave him spoke volumes. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the hesitation to fully accept the comfort he was offering. She had been alone for so long, her trust shattered by people who had used and hurt her, but something in her expression told him that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe him. "I don't know if I can trust you completely," she admitted, her voice low. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again." Alex nodded, his heart aching for her. "That's okay," he said quietly. "You don't have to trust me right away. I'm not going anywhere, though. Whenever you're ready, we'll take it one step at a time." She looked away, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the book in her lap. "I don't want to be broken anymore," she said after a long silence. "I don't want to feel like I'm lost." Alex moved closer, but he didn't reach out to touch her. He knew that physical space was something she needed, so he respected it. He stood there for a moment thinking about how to respond. He had never been great with words, especially when it came to matters of the heart, but this felt different. He couldn't promise her that everything would be okay overnight, but he could offer her something else: patience, time, and a willingness to stand by her as she figured it out for herself. "You're not lost," he said finally, his voice steady but kind. "You just need time to find yourself again, and you're not alone in that process. I'm here no matter how long it takes." She looked up at him then, her eyes softening slightly, and for the first time there was a flicker of hope in her gaze. It was small, but it was there. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Alex smiled, his heart lifting. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They still had a long way to go, but tonight, for the first time, Alex felt like they had crossed an important threshold. She was beginning to believe that there was hope for her, that things could change, and that was the first step toward healing. As he left the room, closing the door softly behind him, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but he knew that for now, they were both in this together. And that, he realized, was more than he could have hoped for. It had been months since Alex first brought her into his home. In that time, both their lives had changed in ways neither of them could have expected. The woman, who had once been broken and silent, was now beginning to emerge from the darkness of her past. She wasn't completely healed, not yet, but there was a change in her. She was no longer a shadow of herself. She had started to find her voice again, bit by bit. Alex had watched her transform, and though it wasn't easy, he felt a deep sense of pride for her. She was stronger than she knew. She had found her way through the walls she had built around herself, and through it all, Alex had remained by her side, not as someone who owned her, but as someone who cared for her, someone who respected her humanity. One evening, after a long day, Alex was sitting in his study, trying to work on some documents. He couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. The house was quieter now, not just because of the late hour, but because the tension that had once filled it was finally gone. There was a calmness that had settled between them, one that made the mansion feel more like a home. Suddenly, he heard a knock on his door. It was light but firm, and it instantly brought his attention away from the papers in front of him. He wasn't expecting anyone, so he was surprised when he opened the door to find her standing there. She had changed so much from the woman he had met months ago. Her posture was straighter, her expression softer, but still with the same quiet strength that had been there all along. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of something deeper in it. A need for clarity, maybe. Alex nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Of course." She walked into the room, standing by the window for a moment, looking out at the night sky. It was clear, the stars visible in the distance. The moonlight poured into the room, casting soft shadows on the walls. It was a peaceful night, the kind where everything felt still and meaningful. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, turning to face him. "About everything. About what I've been through and where I am now." Alex remained silent, watching her closely. He had learned to listen more than speak when it came to her, knowing that the most important words would often come when she was ready to share them. "I've come to realize something," she continued, her voice steady. "You've given me something I thought I'd never have again. A chance. A chance to be me again. A chance to have a life. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand everything that's happened, but I do know this. You didn't just buy me. You saved me. You gave me a chance to rebuild, to find myself." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, standing in front of him, acknowledging the changes she had made. It made him realize that in helping her, he had unknowingly started to help himself as well. He had given her a chance to heal, but she had also taught him something important, that the greatest gift we can give each other isn't control or possession, but freedom and trust. Alex didn't know how to respond at first. He had never been the type of person to talk about emotions, and even now, with all the changes between them, he found himself searching for the right words. But in the end, he didn't need to say much. "You're stronger than you think," Alex said quietly, "and you're not alone anymore." She nodded, and for the first time in months, Alex saw a real smile on her face, a smile that reached her eyes. It was small, but it was genuine, And for him, that was enough. "I've been thinking about something else too," she said after a moment, her voice softening. "I don't want to live in the past anymore. I don't want to be defined by everything that happened before I came here. I want to move forward. I want to have a future." Her words filled the room with a sense of finality, as if she was making a choice for herself. She wasn't going to live in fear, in the shadows of her past. She was going to take control of her future, whatever that might look like. And Alex knew in that moment that she had taken the most important step of all, the decision to free herself, not from him, but from the chains of her past. "I understand," Alex said, his voice sincere. "And I want that for you. Whatever you need, I'll be here. But you have to live for yourself now. Not for me, not for anyone else. Just for you." She smiled again, this time with more confidence. "I think I can do that." As she turned to leave the room, she paused at the door, looking back at him one last time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Alex nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. He didn't need anything more from her. This was enough. The woman who had once been broken, who had been lost in her own pain, was now standing on her own 2 feet, ready to face the world. And he had played a part in that. But she had done the hard work. She had found her strength, her voice, and her future. Later that night, as Alex sat in his study alone again, he reflected on everything that had happened. He had never expected to be part of someone's journey like this. He had never imagined that buying her would lead to something as profound as this. But the truth was, he hadn't just helped her rebuild her life. She had helped him rebuild his own sense of purpose. In giving her the freedom to heal, he had also learned what it meant to truly care for someone, to offer them not ownership, but understanding and respect. Alex wasn't sure where their paths would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. He had helped her find her way, and in the process, he had found his own. The road ahead would not be without challenges, but Alex knew now that they could face whatever came next together. And maybe that was the most important lesson of all, that no matter how lost or broken someone might feel, there is always the possibility of redemption. There is always a chance to start over, to find strength in the most unexpected places. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to step forward and the willingness to trust.